Thanks for being here for another Todd Talk, where we take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. Today we're going to be talking about the depth and complexity icon of ethics. This is the symbol for ethics you see here. You see this diamond or rhombus where half of it is black and half of it is white. And this is a very appropriate symbol for ethics because in a lot of cases you have things that are in a perfect world, there are things that are very black and white. So in other words, it's either right or it's wrong. And if you do this, it's wrong. If you don't do this, it's right. And that's the way it works in a perfect world. But in our world, our complicated world, things kind of muddle together, and this black and white becomes more gray. There's these shades of gray of what is acceptable and what is not. So, for example, something that seemingly would be easy, you shouldn't steal from another person, right? That is just an easy black and white ethical issue. Okay, so if I steal bread from a store, that is stealing. That is wrong. However, what if I'm stealing that bread to feed my hungry family? Does that make it okay? Does my wanting to protect my family and feed my family and make sure my family doesn't starve, does that supersede the law of that you shouldn't steal the bread? And again, there's no right or wrong answer for that, which is what makes an ethical dilemma. Ethical issues typically do not have a definitive yes, no, or right, wrong. It is depending on the perspective that you're looking at. And sometimes people can rationalize these perspectives to make it fit to them so they can do something unethical, and in their minds it's okay because they're from their perspective it was the right thing to do. Other people might see it differently, and this is where we come into play, where the way the society views things. So the questions that come with ethics, one is, what are some beliefs, values, or judgments that exist? And so we have common beliefs, values, and judgments. So for instance, you shouldn't murder someone, or you shouldn't steal from people, or there are other ones that are pretty black and white, pretty plain and simple. However, let's go back to the murder one. So it is completely unethical to murder another person. However, if you were in war, it's perfectly acceptable to kill another person. Matter of fact, if you do so, you're being patriotic, and you're being a hero for your country because you're defending your land and you're keeping these people out. And so this is where the ethics comes into place. Why is killing someone okay over here, but it's not okay over here? So keep in mind, so it's not so easy to make that decision. And so the belief is that in general society, we will not murder another person or kill another person. However, we also have beliefs that if you're in war, it's perfectly acceptable. And so it depends on the perspective you're coming from. How does society teach and spread its code of ethics on the topic? And this comes in various forms. It could come in rules. We've talked about the icon of rules, and rules and ethics kind of overlap with one another. The difference is that there is clearly a right and wrong to rules. If you break the rule, you're wrong. If you follow the rule, you're right. Ethics, again, kind of combines that and makes it a shade of gray, where if you broke this rule, is it really not okay to do that? So, for example, if you have someone that's injured in your car and you need to take them to the hospital and you need to speed to get them there so that they don't die, isn't it perfectly acceptable to break the law and speed as a result, and to run red lights and all those things? So again, it just depends on the situation, depends on the perspective, which is what makes ethics one of my favorite icons, because there are no definitive right, wrong answers. Depending on who you ask, you might get a different response, and that's what makes ethics so interesting. But how we teach and spread these code of ethics is through our rules. It can be from our parents. It can be from our relatives or friends. It can be from our work. It can be from lots of things. But different places have different ethics. So, for example, In a classroom, it's perfectly okay to take a pencil because you need a pencil in order to be able to do your work. But if you're at work, and you take a pencil from someone or take a pencil from somewhere, that might not be accepted. That might be considered stealing office supplies. And so again, depending on the situation or depending upon where this is playing out, you might get a very different response to the same thing. So for example, another example is it's perfectly acceptable for me to wear a bathing suit if I'm going to the beach, correct? That's what you wear when you go to the beach. If I wore that same outfit, that same bathing suit, and I was going to work in my office, would that be acceptable? It would not, because the situation has changed and what is accepted at one place is not accepted at another place. And so society teaches us this, what is appropriate and what is not. What moral principles are involved in the topic? And so when you're looking at ethics, you have to look at, not only is it a rule or a law, but is it morally correct? So again, I would say it is never morally correct to murder somebody. However, if I'm defending my family because a robber is in my house or someone's seeking to do harm to my family, I am certainly going to cross that line and harm that person to prevent them from harming the people that I love. And so what is the moral principle? So a court of law may see, he was just defending himself, so that he's perfectly okay what he did. Or a court of law might see it as though he still committed a murder, and that's not okay. So these moral principles that come into play. Bias, how does bias, prejudice, or discrimination affect the topic? And so different people have different beliefs, values, and judgments. So like I said, what may be acceptable for one family may not be acceptable for another family. And so if here's the perfect example of where this may come into play. In some states, it's illegal to do something, but in another state, it might be perfectly legal. So if you're in the one state and you do it, it's going to be illegal. If you do it in the other state, it's going to be legal. And so the problem is that if you're in the wrong place doing the wrong thing at the wrong time, then it could really, come back to bite you. And so we have to make sure that we look at bias and prejudice and discrimination, what is accepted, and things that were once acceptable. I mean, I've been on this planet for 50 years, and things that were once acceptable are no longer acceptable. And at the same time, things that were not are now acceptable. So it just depends on, this bias, prejudice, and discrimination that's set by society, that's set by the greater good. So what I'm going to be talking about is one of the most famous ethical dilemmas that there is. And this is called the trolley car dilemma. And so what you see here is this trolley car, this magnificently drawn trolley car. And this trolley car is heading down a set of tracks. And you are right here. So this is you. And this is the switch that can change the track to here or to keep it going here. So the trolley car is out of control. It's rolling down the street. And it's headed for these 5 people. And then over here off to the side, there's another side track that you could put it on, and there's only 1 person here. So if the trolley car continues on its path, it is going to hit these 5 people and kill them. If you switch the switch and the trolley car goes down here, you're only going to kill this 1 person. So what is the right decision? It would seem to be really simple. You pull the switch and divert the trolley car so it just kills 1 person, because killing 1 person is better than killing 5 people, correct? Again, not so fast. If we're looking at an ethical issue, here's something. So you have to make a decision to pull this switch. You are making a conscious decision to put this person in harm's way. If you do nothing, then that was the path it was going to take anyways, and it's going to kill those 5 people. So you have a moral dilemma or an ethical dilemma of the decision that you made causing harm to somebody. At the same time, you doing nothing might be something that's morally gray, and it doesn't and can come back to say, oh well, they did nothing when they could have done something. There's also different ways to play this out. So for example, let's say this 1 person right here is your mother. And these are 5 people you don't know. Well, is it perfectly acceptable to let it keep going and kill the people you don't know to save your mom, someone that you do, that raised you and loves you and that you care for? What if you knew that this person right here was going to cure cancer one day? Could you make that ethical dilemma to let it go and hit the 5 people to save this person, which will save more lives down the road? Of course, we can't possibly know that, but still, if you knew that, what decision would you make? Or if these 5 people represented an organization that espouses hate, like the Ku Klux Klan, and this is a peaceful protester right here, would you let the trolley go through and kill these people who morally you don't agree with, that whose values and beliefs you don't agree with? Is that perfectly okay? So in order to save the person whose beliefs and values you do agree with. And so this becomes the trolley car dilemma. Like, what decision are you going to make? And not making a decision is still a decision because you've decided not to act. And if you pull it, you have decided to act. And so this puts this person in a very ethical dilemma. What decision are they going to make? And what are they going to base this decision on? Here are some common ethical questions that you can ask students so that you can discuss this in class so they can try to get a feel for what ethics look like. So one common one is, should you always follow the rules? Now in school, yes, you should always follow the rules. And one of the rules in school is that you shouldn't run in the hallways. But what if you, the teacher, had a heart attack and you fell over and that they had to go get some help and they have to run down the hallway to find someone? You would certainly want them running in the hallway so that you are able to get help sooner. This can be an ethical dilemma. Do you run in the hallways? Do you not run in the hallways? Is it okay? Another one is it okay to sacrifice a smaller group of people in order to save a larger group of people? So the trolley car dilemma is a perfect example of this. Is it okay to sacrifice one person knowing that it will save 5 people? And sometimes this can be a much larger thing. So for example, a real ethical dilemma is the dropping of the atomic bomb on Japan. And so the thought was, by dropping the atomic bomb and killing hundreds of thousands of people, it actually would save even more people that would have, if the war had continued on, more people would have died. And so it sacrificing this group of people actually saved a larger group of people. But some people would argue that that was not the right thing to do. Should we charge money for things that help people? So when you go to the hospital, you have to pay money in order to have your bones mended or to get medication or whatever. Should we be charging for that? I mean, these are things that help people. These are things that are going to keep them alive, and yet these things are being charged. Is that ethical? Should you take care of your family at the expense of putting someone else at a disadvantage? So as we care about our family, and when we talk about moral values and judgments, we care about our family very highly. And so if one of our family members is going to benefit from something and another person is going to suffer from that, we hopefully we do the right thing. But sometimes people are like, oh, I'm going to do what's best for my family, even though it might put someone else at a disadvantage. Is it ever okay to discriminate against someone because of their race, religion, age, or gender? And the ethical, the moral answer would be no, you should never discriminate against someone. But what happens if, there is someone who is older than you, and you have to do something that's really difficult, and they're really old and feeble, and you don't want them to do it because it might harm them. And so you're going to discriminate by not having them take part in this to help them, but at the same time, you're discriminating against them. What is our responsibility to the environment? This is one that's really come up lately, especially with the global warming crisis that seems to be taking place on our planet, which is that the weather is getting more and more out of control because of things that we are directly doing. And one of these, and sometimes we don't even think about these things. So one of the largest contributors to global warming is the flatulence or the farting of cows. And so the right thing to do is to eat less hamburgers. So we're raising less cows, and they're causing less of the odor to go into the atmosphere and cause such harm. there are other ethical dilemmas too. So like, should we drill for oil to power our cars at the expense of ruining the environment? Another ethical dilemma, and this is something that's not a rule or a law, this is why this is an ethical dilemma though, is should we eat things or do things we know are bad for us? I love Oreo cookies, but there's nothing nutritional about Oreo cookies. There's nothing that's good for my body when it comes to Oreo cookies, except for I like the taste. And if I eat too many of those Oreo cookies, I'm going to become fat. And that's going to cause me to be unhealthy, possibly, and put strain on my heart. And yet, we make decisions all the time to eat something we know is not good for us, whether it's chocolate or drinking pop or having, not eating our fruits and vegetables. We do this all the time, even though we know it's bad for it. Another one is the idea of smoking. Some people think it's their right to be able to smoke, even though they know the harm that it does to them and the harm it can do to others because of the secondary smoke. And so, should we do things that we know are bad for us, even though we have the ability to make that decision? There's nothing illegal about smoking, but is it the right thing to do? Especially like if you have small children and you're smoking in the house, and you're putting them in harm's way because of that? Is that an ethical issue? Is that something you shouldn't be doing? So how do you teach ethics in the class? And one of the easiest ways to do this, the most effective way, is to do a debate. And of course, a debate, you can't just have kids arguing with one another. That's not debate. That's just arguing. So you want to have a structure. You want to have a format to that. And so an example you see right here is a really simple debate format, which starts with an affirmative where kids would have to state their case. Then there would conference, and then the negative gets to have a rebuttal of what the affirmative opened with. So they get to try to poke holes in the argument, trying to, to make their own case. Then the negative gets an opening, then another team meeting, and the affirmative gets to give its rebuttal, and then another team meeting, and then the affirmative gets its closing statements based upon what they heard in the argument, and then the negative gets its closing. And this is a really simple debate format. But what this allows you to do, and you can change the times, you can change, and this allows you to work with an entire class. You could break them into teams, and they could take different parts. But I really like using debate to teach ethics. So, for example, you could use it with kids as young as when I use this with third graders. We actually had a debate on whether Goldilocks was right for going into the bear's house when she was lost in the woods. Ethically, when it comes to rules, she should not go in the house because that's breaking and entering. But she's starving and she might die. So should she be allowed to go in the house? And that was a debate that we had. If you have older students, you might get into more controversial topics. Not too controversial, but you might want to look at you want to avoid, of course, probably the big ones of like abortion and religion and politics. But you could be looking at, if you're a teaching science class, you could look at cloning. Is cloning ethical or not? If you're teaching a social studies class, the one I mentioned before is the dropping of the atomic bomb, but there are many issues in there that you can take a look at. The Civil War, which side was justified in what they did. Lots of things that you could argue there. Language arts, you could debate between characters in a book and the decisions that they made. And math, you can make debates, debate topics on, whether you should use this particular formula or how this mathematical formula changed the world, and was it to the benefit, was it to not to the benefit, and things of that nature. So you can use this with any age range, and you can adjust it accordingly. Here's another example of a debate. This is called public forum debate, and in here you have a speaker. You have various speakers, and you have the reason why I like this one is you also have what's called crossfire, and the crossfire is two people, one from each side, get to have a kind of a debate back and forth, and one's asking questions and one's answering questions, and they're challenging each other. And so this is more for a more advanced class that has gotten good at debate or can handle having a debate in a civil manner. And so this is one that I use with them. So if you're going to do a debate in your class, you just need to find a format that works, and then have them choose sides, or even better, choose sides for them. Sometimes it's really interesting to have students argue for something that they don't agree with or against something that they do. And that helps them to gain perspective.